Hey everybody, today's topic is car buying. All the things you need to know if you're buying a new car in 2025 because things are getting complicated and, car buying is just not the same as it was maybe the last time you bought a new car. But before we get into that, there are a few other things we should talk about. So let's roll the intro and get chatting on the other side.
Alex, you told me this is going to be all about the car buying process. So I went all the way back to my dealership days. I put myself in a tie, and now you're saying you want to talk about some news first. So just so that I don't have to stay in here too much longer, let's go ahead and talk about the news.
So tell me, when you were at the dealership, did they require that you wore ties that did not go with what you were wearing?
This looks fantastic, but it's this logo. What are you supposed to do with blue and yellow? It's tough.
You're supposed to
It's
wear a
tough.
matching tie. You're supposed to color
I have.
coordinate.
You'd be surprised at how many ties I have. I did not have one
Mhm,
for
mhm.
this occasion.
Uh, that's no excuse. You should have
Mm.
gone tie-free then, I would assume.
Yeah,
Uh,
t-shirt was the answer.
but yeah, the big news is Honda Prelude. That happened this week. Honda has brought the Prelude back, and this is the first time in actually quite some time that I have been really intrigued by the resurrection of a car name from the past because I really didn't think Integra was that great of a comeback somehow,
Mm.
and this is kind of different.
This is, and you and I are both excited about this. So, if it starts to sound fanboyish, we apologize, or I do at least. I've always loved the Prelude. When I was growing up, it was the car that
Mhm,
I wanted. I couldn't afford it at the time because, man, they held their value pretty well. But the problem here is that this is not the Prelude that people knew, but it's also not
mhm,
that
mhm.
different. So, front wheel drive, which the Prelude always was, it was never a rear wheel drive sports car. It was a sporty version of a Civic or an Accord, depending on
Always a
generation and
cord,
stuff.
always a cord.
Well, now Civic.
Now
And then
Civic.
the other th
That
and
that
then the
that
other
is
thing is
that's the big
yeah,
switch though in a way, is that previously it was always teamed with Accord. So in the Honda lineup, it was a bit bigger feeling than Civic of the era. Now though, it's tied with Civic.
right. But the other thing is that it was always a test bed for technology. And that's where, we had the four-wheel steering, we had the super handling ATTS, right, system, so that you would eliminate some of that
Mhm.
understeer and really the downside of having a front-wheel drive. Now that tech forward, that test bed is for hybrid technology. Obviously, it already exists in the Civic, but this is basically Honda pushing it forward and saying, "Hey, we're not making this a sportier driving experience because we're slapping on suspension of the Civic Type R."
Yes, and that is the interesting twist, is it's a blend of Civic Type R and Civic Hybrid because it is gonna use, what surprisingly is an unmodified version of the Civic Hybrid system. So
Mhm.
about 200 horsepower, depending on where you are in the world. In Europe, of course, they can only advertise it as 188 horsepower, 181 horsepower, because that's what the motor's rated for.
Which is your preferred number.
Which is kinda my preferred number, but you know what? I'll go with what Honda says in the US because that's confusing to describe it other ways. But at any rate, it basically is an electric car with a gasoline battery pack is the best way to
Mhm.
think of this, which is why it's intriguing and why it's also different than what a lot of commenters have been deriding it as, which is a coupe Prius. It really is not because the hybrid system is much more responsive than the hybrid system that we find in a Prius, and that's why I'm kind of interested in it. But we don't know as much as we would like to know. We don't know final pricing, and for some reason, they've also kept dimensions away from us at this point.
Yes, and we didn't get down and start measuring all those different corners and angles. I am curious though. You are on record as saying that you really like the Civic Hybrid hatch and that you would love to swap in Civic Si components onto
Mhm,
that
mhm.
Civic Hybrid. Would you rather have the Civic Hybrid hatch swapping in some SI drivetrain components, mostly things like the suspension and the braking, or would you go just get a Prelude and have the Civic Type R components on there?
Yeah, it really just depends on the price tag because I'm
Mm,
gonna bet since the more we know about Prelude, the more limited production seems to be. I'm gonna bet it's gonna be commanding Civic Type R kind of markups on top of a bonkers price
mm,
tag. In some markets where we do
markup.
know some pricing details, it appears that it may actually be more expensive than Civic Type R. So, that remains to be seen.
Yeah,
But
I think it'll be close. I expect it'll come in less. Obviously, the trade-off there is the visceral, ridiculous,
mhm,
the Type R engine
mhm,
versus something much more daily driver friendly, much more economical. And honestly, I think the Prelude stands apart from the Civic visually enough that it does seem like its own complete model. At least to me, it
mhm.
does. The interior is set up a little bit differently. It especially things like the seats. That feels like a more premium experience. And I don't know. I'd be curious what an Acura Prelude would end up looking like. It probably doesn't have the cloth seats in the back.
Definitely interesting questions without answers at the moment, but we will know more soon
No.
and we will be driving it in January. So be sure and
Hmm.
stay tuned. Let's get to one of our viewer questions. This is an interesting one because it's tiptoeing towards the main topic of the day. He was asking about whether we thought Hyundai was going to bring the updated Nexo to the US. And this kind of brings us more broadly to the state of hydrogen in the United States and whether or not shoppers should be looking at a hydrogen vehicle, yes or no at the moment. We're going to try and keep this as short as possible. But basically, the updated Nexo is Hyundai's hydrogen vehicle for worldwide markets. It's very clearly focused at their domestic market in South Korea, where the front wheel drive nature is not a problem. They don't need all wheel drive. Range is important because a lot of people in South Korea don't own their home. They rent or they live in communal type high rises. So even if they do own, they're in a condo, something like that. So they don't really have as much infrastructure for battery electric vehicles as new car buyers in the US would have available there. So that's kind of the rationale for that there. Now in the United States, we have really only one state with hydrogen infrastructure, California. We also have
Hmm.
two publicly available stations, as I recall, in Hawaii, and that is
Hmm.
basically it. So the likelihood of some of these newer updated hydrogen models like BMW's upcoming expected hydrogen vehicle, et cetera, it seems unlikely at this point because it's dying a little bit on the vine here in the United States. In California, there are only about 50 stations currently in operation. 62 stations technically exist, but a bunch of them are temporarily non operational. That's a far cry from the 200 that have been promised by this date. And if we compare this to Europe, there are 294 stations in Europe. Germany has 113. Japan has 150. But most of the hydrogen stations and infrastructure on the world really is in South Korea. They have 420 stations. So South
That
Korea
is
has, yeah,
ugh,
they have
dense.
more stations than Europe and Japan combined, basically, they're in operation. And they have these really big hydrogen stations where they're
Mm.
designed to address the complaints and of people in California. So if you look at the American press when they talk about hydrogen vehicles, like, oh, they don't work. There's this, the problem, that problem. They can never fill enough vehicles here and there, et cetera. Well, the hydrogen stations, the large ones in Korea, are designed to fill a car every 50 seconds. So versus a
That's
gas
pumping
station, yeah,
hard.
that's
It's fun.
basically gas station throughput is what they're talking about there. They can handle 1,500 cars a day through their larger hydrogen stations there, and
Like
that's
a regular fueling station.
yeah, and that's why I think that we see this focus from Hyundai on hydrogen in their domestic market. They've already sold about 50,000 Nexos there. It's a drop in the bucket compared to all the cars in South Korea. There are, 10, 15,000 Mirais, something like that, and a few Honda fuel cell vehicles here and there, et cetera, as well. But they are interestingly building out this infrastructure ahead of presumably more hydrogen vehicles coming. If there's more than just the Nexo in Hyundai's future, we don't know. They also are focusing on hydrogen buses, of course, and hydrogen trucks and things like that. But I
And
think
the industrial application there it makes a
yeah.
lot more sense, and it can be a lot more streamlined or specific about where these stations are at,
Hmm.
what they're supposed to do. If you are trying to do things like tackle emissions, then
Hmm.
industrial is the best place to start. I spent some time down at Toyota's
Hmm.
hydrogen headquarters down in California, and they've got their loading docks. Not only is that where they're creating some hydrogen, but they're also using it for most of the vehicles. They're basically at the dock, so zero emission output from the vehicles
Hmm.
themselves. And honestly, I was really curious about something. It's highly compromised, so I don't pretend it's not. But something like the CRV plug-in hybrid fuel cell,
Hmm.
that's something that really intrigued me. And that's one where I go, listen, my day-to-day driving, if I'm driving around town, is going to be all EV based on just basic
Hmm.
mileage. So if I and because of the way I have to travel to the airport, I either go north or south, an hour or 2 hours. And so I would pass one of these refueling stations every once in a while if it was within an hour of me. And that's something that I'd be willing to try out. But unfortunately, like you said, there are none. The closest to me is in Victoria, BC. So
Yeah, Canada.
that's going to be a ferry ride across the Puget Sound, or I got to go up through Vancouver. So
And
not as
importantly, you got to leave the country. We should address the common complaints here because I think the problem with hydrogen was that it was assailed from both sides. In a way, it was
Mhm.
assailed from the anti-green side, saying it's unnecessary, and it was also assailed by the EV enthusiast and the EV crowd, most notably Elon Musk, especially, as being wasteful and tied to fossil fuels and all of that kind of jazz. Hydrogen can be made in a renewable fashion. Currently, a lot of the hydrogen is not necessarily, but
Mhm.
statutorily in California, a large percentage must be renewable, and True Zero has a lot of stations that are 100% renewable hydrogen. So that's
Mhm.
not the biggest problem. The key thing I would say before we move on is thinking about hydrogen in terms of direct efficiency parallels to electric vehicles is the wrong way to think about this, because
Right.
we do many things that are not efficient in this world
So many.
because of convenience, and that is the key thing about hydrogen. It is a method of storing energy in a way that will last a while, because you can compress it and store it in containers where very, very little leaks out. Hydrogen will eventually leak out of almost anything, but very, very slowly if
Mhm.
properly contained. So you can store it for a really long time. You also have the ability to generate your hydrogen when you're creating green forms of electricity during the day
Mhm.
when the sun is out, and then using it later. And importantly, you have the ability to rapidly fill vehicles that are inherently zero emissions rapidly for people that live in an area where they can't charge. So, for instance, if you lived in a high rise somewhere and you had a decent commute and you just needed to be able to fill up without spending 20 minutes at a DC fast charge station, that's the theory for a hydrogen vehicle. You'd only have to fill it once a week, just like a gasoline car. It's that drop in gasoline replacement. But again, future is a little uncertain.
But Porsche just teased the Cayenne with induction charging, but that'll be for another episode.
Yes, and induction charging, bad idea anyway. So let's move on to the main topic, which is car buying. And we have a bunch of viewer questions. Why don't we start with that first one there?
Welcome to the Auto Buyer's Guide car dealership, where we're here to help you buy a car where surprisingly a lot of car salesmen are not. All right, so our first question is about pricing and haggling. And I think as we go through this, there are going to be a bunch of different levels and components to the car buying process. And don't worry, if you are listening on YouTube, we will definitely have these different chapters broken out so you can tune into the one that matters to you the most. So let's talk about pricing and haggling. I have always found it shocking. And I guess very quickly, for folks who don't know, I spent 5 years selling cars. It's not my favorite 5 years, but it was an interesting one. And here I am to tell you what happens and what doesn't. That's why I dressed up back like I was at the dealership. Um, when it comes to pricing, the MSRP of the vehicle is the only set pricing point that you have for how much this car is going to cost you. When there is a sale at a dealership and it says sale, it's hard to have a sale on an item that doesn't have a fixed price, because you probably shouldn't just assume you're going to pay MSRP on a
Hmm.
vehicle, especially a lot of our domestic brands. And the best way you can get this information, which used to be a lot harder to get because there wasn't an internet, and there wasn't internet that was as expansive as it is today, you had to go to the dealership and assume they were telling you the truth. And it turns out that was not always the case. So now, let's say you have picked your vehicle. I say I want a 2025 Nissan Frontier. And I say, what are the deals on the Nissan
Hmm.
Frontier? Is Nissan, step one, is Nissan offering any incentive on this vehicle? You go to nissanusa.com and you can go to shop, and usually there's a current incentives or a special offers. Sometimes it's going to be specific to your region, sometimes it's going to be national, but you can see if there is a current finance or lease incentive available. You can see if there is what we will commonly call cash on the hood.
Hmm.
And you'll find a lot of that on trucks, big trucks, so not midsize as much as full size. But it'll tell you, hey, right now, and again, I just picked Nissan, but in this case, Nissan's offering $4,000 off of this vehicle. So now, what you should do is make sure that the trim that you want is listed in their offering. but then take the MSRP minus that $4,000, and that should be your starting price.
Mhm.
So just
Mhm.
know that that sort of information is available. What you're not going to be able to do is go in and say, here's a $35,000 truck. I'm walking out of here paying $25,000 for it. That's just not going to happen. We're talking about small negotiating room. And that's just based on what the dealership has to pay for a car. And I'm going to make this up, but let's say they pay $32,500 for this 35,000 vehicle. They could potentially make 2,500 bucks on it, but then they also have to pay the salesperson. They have to pay the sales
Mhm.
manager.
Mhm.
So there are not these just enormous margins that people may assume, at least on most vehicles. And if that $4,000 incentive that I made up is coming from Nissan, then Nissan gives that to the dealership essentially to help bolster their income. Because obviously they in theory lost some money on that vehicle coming in. So I don't know, Alex. What would you say? I'd say like 2 to 5% would be something that you want to try and shoot for if you really, really, really are intent on negotiating.
Yeah, the industry average spans between 3 and 10% depending on the brand, and this is a very brand specific thing because the amount of padding is it varies from manufacturer to manufacturer. This is not just the variation of invoice price supposedly to MSRP, and
Mhm.
that's one of those things that historically shoppers have targeted is they want to know what the invoice is. I remember in the 80s or 90s there was always this negotiation tactic recommendation, get the dealer to show you the invoice and then you can see what the deal is. The
Mhm.
the tricky part of that is that is now public information. You can actually find it on Edmunds and TrueCar and a bunch of other websites will actually show you invoice pricing for a particular vehicle. But invoice pricing is importantly not the actual price the dealer pays for the car. You would assume that it would be, but that is not the case. Dealer holdbacks and dealer cash from the manufacturer are further off that invoice. So a car dealer could sell you a car at invoice and still make several percent on the sale just due to the way that these kickbacks from the manufacturer actually function on their pricing level. Because remember, as complicated as the pricing is for you as the consumer, it's also convoluted and complicated for the dealer and their interaction with the manufacturer of the car. But in
Mhm.
a nutshell, there may be quote unquote less margin between invoice and MSRP on a Toyota or a Honda versus a Chevy or a Dodge,
Mhm.
but also there are going to be greater dealer incentives from the manufacturer on the Dodge and on the Chevy, which allow you to go out and see those $10,000 off of a pickup truck. Or the sales sign where it's like end of quarter whatever, we're going to be giving just bonkers insane amounts of cash off of a Grand Cherokee or a Silverado or an F-150. It's almost always going to be those higher volume, high margin American vehicles that are going to get those really crazy deals on the hood, or a Pacifica minivan, which is really a screaming deal right now.
Sure. Now, it's the exact opposite of a markup, right? So the
Hmm.
vehicles that get markups are the first ones there on the lot. They're going to be limited production, limited availability. If the car is there in mass, that's the one you can probably find a deal on. But I don't know, maybe dispel something here. What's the best way to go get a deal? Because people come in and say, "I have cash. I'll buy today. I'm shopping other."
Hmm.
There's a lot of tools and tricks that people try to use, and here's the reality: you have to consider where the dealership makes money. They
Hmm.
make money on your purchase of the vehicle, as in the sales price. They make money on your trade in. So if you're trading in a vehicle, they plan to make money on your trade in. They're going to make money if you finance through them. They're going to make money if you buy any products from them. And that's either hard or soft products. So things like accessories or things like warranty or prepaid maintenance coverage. Those are all the places that dealerships are going to be able to make money. And then on the long term, the dealership will make money if you come back and service with them. So
Hmm.
that's an
Hmm.
incentive for them as well. They'll also make a little bit of money from the manufacturer, basically based on number of units sold, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah,
So
how
when you
long that
go
car
in,
was in inventory as well.
yep, yep. So you say, I want to get the best deal. Well, don't come in and say I'm paying cash because that means they're going to lose money
Hmm.
because they can't sell you financing.
So let's break this down just a little bit here. So how much can you really get off the MSRP? Again, depending on brand, you're looking at between 3 and 10% for most vehicles. There are some
Mhm.
exceptions there. The delivery charge or destination charge is non-negotiable. That is simply passed right along from the manufacturer to the dealer. There's no point in haggling over it. It generally cannot be removed. Sometimes dealers will say, well, okay, I'll give you an extra $100 here to compensate for that, but you'll notice that the destination charge is the destination charge on your paperwork.
Yep.
Dealer installed accessories are the highest margin, so your point of bargaining is going to be best on them. If you're looking at especially a Honda, for instance, where some things are not factory installed, they're dealer installed options like wheels and sometimes tow hitches and things like that, floor mats, that kind of thing. That is your better bargaining position as far as percent off of the listed price of these items. Cash doesn't help. Your best bet is to, if you have good credit and you have the cash, that's lovely for you.
Mm-hmm.
Go in, let the dealer find you financing, make sure you can pay it off immediately on day 1 or 2, and then go ahead and pay it off as soon as you get that very first month thing. You may need to be willing to eat 1 month payment, something like that, in order to actually get this working. You can also do a lot down, but the dealer gets that kickback again if you're financing the vehicle. A small one if you're financing through the captive finance arm from the car company. So if you're buying
Mm-hmm.
a Toyota and it's Toyota Finance, they get a small kickback there. They get a
Mm-hmm.
big kickback from those, semi shady, like, and we'll finance anybody on the car thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's where they make
Mm-hmm.
some good cash. And then we had questions about timing, because this is the next part in it's sort of
Mm-hmm.
timing of the purchase. Well, I'll let you talk about that one. But before I say, the next thing to do is, if you're looking through inventory, if you're looking at a hot car, you know that you're not going to get much off. Like if you're shopping for a Civic Type R, forget it. Just your
Mm-hmm.
advertised deals are probably all you're going to get. If you're looking for F-150 Silverado, something along those lines, you can probably get a better deal on those cars that are on the dealer lot for a while. So if you're looking at something that hasn't moved, that's where there's going to be incentive to haggle, because that's where you're going to get, or the dealer's going to get more cash back from the car company. So aged inventory starts getting these greater and greater kickbacks from the manufacturer to help move metal. And that may coincide with, time of the month.
Mm-hmm. So, as far as the timing of the month goes, the thing you need to know is that the motivation to sell before the end of a month comes mostly from the salesperson and the sales manager, because they want good numbers before the end of the month. That has very little to do with the manufacturer. So, end of the
Mm-hmm.
month and end of the quarter, same thing. The motivation is there on site from the dealership and the employees, and that's where they might start to make some deals.
Mm-hmm.
There is a world where, and again, I apologize to all the dealership folks. I'm going to share just a little bit here. If I sell 2 more cars by the end of the day, I will get an increase in my pay, not just on the cars themselves, but a huge bump. I'm incentivized to do that. Now, my sales manager, he might have a certain, level that he's supposed to hit before the end of the month, and he says, "Hey, listen, I'm going to take a hit on these 2 cars, and then next month I'll go ahead and charge somebody else more money, and I'll make up the difference, but I'm going to get a huge increase. We'll get more
Mm-hmm.
cars available to us." So, and here's the other part. There's always a rob Peter to pay Paul situation. And one of the worst things I ever heard at the dealership, and I will keep those stories small, but was someone being so excited that they just made $10,000 on selling an old lady a fully loaded minivan she didn't need. Those are the horror stories. But what
Mm-hmm.
happens is that older lady just paid somebody else's discount, right? Because the dealership can't do that to everybody. There's somebody else's, "I won't buy this unless I get such and such money off." Well, that money that you got off came from somebody else. And that's one of the things I
Mm-hmm.
really hate about this experience is, if I crushed it, if I paid less than invoice, if somehow the dealership lost money on my car, somebody's going to make it up on the other side of things. And that's where the adversarial nature of
Mm-hmm.
this thing really comes into play.
And I would caution everybody out there. Dealers will probably tell you I lost money on the car. They never lose money on the car. There is no
Right.
dealership out there that I can think of that would ever sell a car at an actual loss, because again, invoice price is not the actual cost of the vehicle. So they can do this whole guilt trip of like, I am selling you this car below invoice.
But
Well,
what
yeah.
they didn't tell you is that they gave you $4,000 less for your trade-in than it's worth. Don't worry,
Mm-hmm.
they'll make it up on that
Mm-hmm.
side of
Mm-hmm.
things. Or you're financing, and
Right.
I'm gonna talk about
Mm-hmm.
financing here. I've got some numbers written down. But in the state of
And they
Washington,
also
at least, go ahead.
and they also won't tell you that the dealer holdback on that car was 5%, something like that.
Right,
And so,
right.
even though they sold it at invoice, quote unquote, they still got 5% back from the manufacturer. So, or 5% discount off of that, I should say, from the
Right.
manufacturer.
They just need their kickback to come in. So for the moment
Hmm.
they lost it, but
Hmm.
in 48 hours they'll be made
Yeah.
whole.
Right.
And when it comes to financing, again, at least in the state of Washington, it's totally legal for them to get an interest rate from a bank that says 4.99% and have you sign on the dotted line at 6.99%, which means that they just made 2% interest on you, and then obviously the bank that they just signed for gets a portion of that and they get a portion of that. So no one loses money. That's not how you do business. But let's talk about financing, because there are a couple different ways to look at this. There's leasing and there's financing. I'll just start on financing, because this is how much
Hmm.
are you going to pay for your car. And like Alex said, the best thing you can do is if you're chasing an incentive and the absolute lowest, lowest price, and they say, oh, if you finance, we'll give you $500 off, and you say, okay, great, you pay it off the next month. Cool. Most people are going to finance their cars. And the average used to be 5 months or 5 years, so 5 years or 60 months. And honestly, that does seem to be climbing up, not just with the price of vehicles, but with what people are trying to afford. So I
Hmm.
went and looked at two banks, two credit unions. Right now, used cars at these two major banks are 5.24% and 5.89%. And those are not incredible numbers, but that's just where we're at
Hmm.
right now. The credit unions I looked at were a little bit worse, 5.99% and 6.05%.
Hmm.
So I'm just going to say right now, we're right around 6%, 5.5, 6%. If you're looking at a used car, just know that those rates will always be a little bit more expensive.
Hmm. Hmm.
In this case, it's usually about zero point 0.2 to zero point 0.3 from what I went ahead and looked at. And then I saw a strange one here that for one of these banks that had a lease buyout rate, which is basically just financing a used car, but that was 0.4% higher than financing a used car. And there was a high mileage rate, which will also happen. This, in this
Hmm.
case, was vehicles older than 2022 and over 100,000 miles. So mostly over 100,000 miles. And at that point,
Hmm.
it was 7.58%. So just know
Yep.
what you're shopping for is going to change that. But as long as you know,
Hmm.
as you're shopping, because it's hard to keep track of all these numbers. But if you're looking at a $40,000 car, just know that every $5,000 can be about $100 a month. And if you want to lower that amount,
Hmm.
you either get a less expensive car or you put more money down in advance. And that just changes how much you end
Yep.
up financing.
Hmm.
But also, there's financing available from these manufacturers that are incentivized that are going to really change the rate. So I looked at two main categories just real quick. I looked at mid-sized trucks. I looked at Tacoma, a Colorado, and a Nissan Frontier. And then I looked at three rows, a Grand Highlander, a Pilot, and a Telluride. Right now, and that's as recording, you can get 3.99% for 60 months on a Tacoma, a 2025 Tacoma. So that's nearly half the rate of the
Hmm.
going rate.
Yep.
Chevy with the Colorado has no financing incentives available. That just means you're going to pay right around that 5.5 or 6% for a 60-month loan. But if you want a Nissan Frontier, 1.9% for 60 months. I would never shop the car I want based on the financing. But if you're down to one or two vehicles, and let's
Hmm.
just say in this case it's a Grand Highlander and a Pilot, for me, a 0.2, 0.3% interest rate is not going to move the needle. I'm going to go with the car that I
Yep.
want. But if they're a dead tie, I guess that one is going to go ahead and tell you which one you like. But that information is readily available. And the interest rates that I pulled are also just from these banks' websites. If I
Yep.
was going for a loan, I go to my bank first and say, what can you give me? So you get pre approved for a loan from your bank. And then I would go ahead and look at these other, and I would have my credit score from them, and they'd say, "Oh yeah, you're in our top tier," and then I would assume I'm in whatever tier, mid tier, top tier, low tier
Hmm.
for another bank. I'd put those numbers in my head, and then I'd go to the dealership and say, "What can you do?" That's
Yep.
your baseline.
Yep. It depends. I would say it depends on kind of what you're going for here in a way. Remember, this is part of why a used car is not always the best idea for some shoppers, because if you have decent credit and you're shopping for a car and you're willing to spend about $30,000,
Mhm.
you are probably going to be in a better financial situation if you buy the new car with cheaper financing than the used car that's going to have a double or even triple the rate on it. Um, I would recommend, instead of going to your bank first, the first stop should be just subscribe to the either MyFICO or things like that. You
Mhm.
can actually go to the TransUnion, the Equifax and the other credit agency that I've totally forgotten at this moment, and you can actually get your free credit report from them as well. So you should know your credit score in advance. Then, if you've already decided that you're going to be buying, I don't know, a Silverado or something like that,
Mhm.
then you can actually apply directly to GM financing before you go to the dealer and get pre-approved there. So you'll know what you're approved for in advance. That's probably going to be the best option because you're always going to get the best rate there. And it's important to remember to not have your credit pulled a bazillion times because that is one of the things that's going to really start dropping your credit score. So if you're going out there willy-nilly going, oh, I don't know, and visiting dealers and getting offers and financing offers here and there, you're going to end up slowly dropping your credit score. And by the time you actually get the car, maybe you don't qualify for that deal anymore. That's going to be especially important though for the really cheap finance rates from especially the big three. So if we're looking right now, for instance, GM has 0% financing for 36 months on a Silverado right now. You're probably going to need to be over 800 on your credit score to be there.
Yeah, and I would say that if you are going to what we used to call just shotgun blast your credit applications out, the best place to do that is the dealership because they're going to do one click. Here it goes. It happens all at the same
Hmm.
time,
Hmm.
and just know that dealer is going to have preferred lenders. So if it's not coming from the manufacturer, then they're going to have their own preferred lenders.
Hmm.
So I'm going to make up names, but let's say Chase and Wells Fargo and Bank of America, even if they all come back with the same rate, one of those banks might give the dealership more money to go
Hmm.
with that bank. Or if they say, I'm making up numbers, but 4.5% versus 5%, but the dealership will get paid significantly more, not just in the change in interest rate, but because of a different kickback or a deal to go to sell you that 5% one from again bank
Hmm.
one instead of bank two, then that's what they'll show you. So just know that they don't have to show you when they come out and say, "Hey, we got you a loan for this."
Yep.
Um, that doesn't mean that's the only loan they got back.
Yep. The easy thing, if your credit is good, and I would argue that if your credit's not great, maybe we shouldn't be doing a car like this at this time, or we should be really looking down the list of cars to get something that's more
Short-term
affordable.
car purchases versus long-term car
Yeah.
purchases.
Something that's more affordable so that way you can be in a better financial situation. But at any rate, going with the manufacturer's captive finance arm route is handy because that dealer is probably still going to get whatever compensation may be involved in that program, even though you've pre-approved yourself and you've run in with that financing. And it can save some some time just to make sure that you qualify for what it is that you're looking for there. Now,
Mhm.
the other interesting thing that you should do is look for incentives in advance, but really read that fine print about which models and trims are actually applicable for that incentive that's on the national incentive list for the manufacturer, as well as those financing deals. Because, for instance, if we look now at the Silverado lineup, for instance, from Chevy, the 0% APR financing is on 2025 Silverados. It's 2.9% on 2026s.
Mhm.
So if you're willing to get the car that's 1 year older, quote unquote, then you can get that cheaper finance rate.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of that, especially. I mean, there's a cool period where you see the 26s and you see the 25s, and if you say not only did 26 not add anything significant or important to me, but also maybe they made a change that I don't really
Mhm.
like. You're telling me right now I can have both of those in front of me. One has better financing, and I actually like it better. Some people might tell you not to buy the year-old
Mhm.
car, and I go buy the one that makes sense for you. But that's sort of a home run situation for me.
Yeah, the year-old car could theoretically suffer greater depreciation in air quotes here
Mhm.
over the next three calendar years consecutive from the date that you bought it versus buying the 2026 because that model year is different. But in
Mhm.
reality, it's not going to be a big deal because again, you're getting the car for less. So yes, you're not going to be able to sell it for as much, but you also paid less for it at the beginning. And remember, especially now, we're seeing some pretty significant increases in MSRPs and destination charges for 2026 model year vehicles because of inflation on the car side of things. So we are seeing some pretty decent price increases this year.
And I think this is the next point here is figuring out how long you want to keep this car and what it is you're shopping for. Are you looking for a short-term vehicle or a long-term vehicle? And one of the best short-term purchases you can make is not actually a purchase, it's going to be a lease.
Hmm.
And that's where that 2025 on that lot is probably going to have a better lease deal than the 2026. And for most people who lease their car, they are picking the fixed period, usually 2 to 3 years. They're picking how many miles they want to drive, between 10 and 15,000 a year, usually 10, 12, or 15. And at the end of it, they hand the keys back to the dealer, the manufacturer, and drive away in something different. So that's a great way to
Hmm.
usually get more car than you could afford on a regular loan. Your monthly payments will be less. And to be able to say, there might be a better deal, I'm going to chase this one. But if you weren't wholly satisfied with your purchase, let's say you decided to make the financial decision, you leased this car instead of buying that one, and you go, oh, I kind of wish I had a moonroof, or a hybrid would be cool, but I wasn't sure at this time. That way you're saving a bunch of money over the car purchase, and you're not stuck with this vehicle for the next 5, 10,
Hmm.
15 years. If that's how you buy your cars, you said, hey, I'm going to try this out and see if it matters. And then at the end, like I said, you can either drop your keys off, or you could buy out that lease, and it's basically like purchasing a used car. It's just your own car, assuming the manufacturer lets you do so.
Yes, and there are some additional caveats there to keep in mind. There's always going to be a lease termination fee.
Mhm.
Some manufacturers are, which is payable at the end of the lease, by the way, for people that don't know what that is. So it's basically you return the car, you get a final bill in the mail, which is, last payment plus this lease termination fee that some people forget. But you're also going to be responsible for excess wear and tear on the vehicle. And some manufacturers and some dealers are going to be really sticky about this, and some are more lenient about this. So do your research and look into that before you expect this to be a one price deal. Think of it also kind of like an extended rental, because that's basically what it is. If you're the kind of person that says, no, I don't like that idea, it's just throwing more money away every month, then clearly leasing is not for you. But
Mhm.
it is very popular in the luxury car segment, and more luxury cars are being leased. So we see more and more incentive spend, more and more deals, more and more attractive offers to try and get customers into cars with lease deals. And dealers really quite like them because it gives them effectively fixed pricing. Very few people go into a lease arrangement trying to haggle that MSRP, that sale price down off MSRP for a lease, even though you still actually
You
could,
still
and you
absolutely
would
can.
actually get a better lease rate on it.
Mhm.
And also remember that those national lease offers are very often very specific configurations. Like you'll see a 3 Series lease deal for like $300 a month. Well, that is a BMW 330i with one specific option and no optional colors or something like that. Like it's got to be black or white
And low
and these
miles.
things. Right. And it's going to be typically low miles, etc. But if that works for you, then that's fine. But that's where we
Mhm.
get all these CPO cars coming later in life, the sort of certified pre-owned vehicles, which
Mhm.
also have decent financing deals on them, because this is trying to keep that car and that customer in the ecosystem. So know that you're going to pay more for a certified pre-owned vehicle from a dealer, that same branded dealer. So if
Mhm.
you're looking at a CPO Acura, know that that is going to be more expensive than buying an Acura just on the open market, or buying that same model from a Ford dealership that had one traded in, whatever it is,
Mhm.
than that CPO. But you do get the extended warranty, and you may get financing offers on that, which can kind of soften the blow, but it's still
Mhm.
probably going to cost more.
And that's when you definitely want to make sure you research, because if you go in assuming a CPO has incentivized financing, you could find yourself in a tough spot because it may not.
Hmm.
Also, know that yes, it's going to come with extended warranty, and there's some confidence that the vehicle has gone through and passed a certain inspection list that says it's at least this good from the dealership. And if you're at a Toyota dealer and they have a certified Lexus, just know it's not certified by Lexus. They can
Hmm.
say certified whatever, but it has to be Toyota certified pre-owned, Lexus certified pre-owned. There's a whole sticker label situation. But you can also get, with the certified pre-owned, extended warranty available. They would call it an extended service contract from the manufacturer that you can't get on just any other
Hmm.
vehicle. So because this vehicle has already been inspected by a certified technician, and they say, yes, it's this good, the manufacturer says, okay, then it's less likely X, Y, or Z will go wrong. Therefore, we'll give you a essentially a discount on some extended warranty services,
Hmm.
and that's obviously going to make it more expensive. But it's a really cool way to say, hey, I want, especially for me, I look at it as like if I wanted a luxury car and I say, oh, but I'm really worried about some of the prices for repairs. I could say, hey, I'm going to go get this fully loaded, BMW 5 Series, and I'm going to keep it for a couple
Hmm.
years, maybe 2 or 3 years, and I'm going to make sure I get a warranty coverage that covers that period of time, and it's still going to be leaps and bounds less expensive than if I went and bought or
Hmm.
leased a brand new one. So there's just a lot of different ways to play with that, but just be careful that it's actually certified. And my advice to everyone listening to this is to never buy any warranty or extended service coverage that is not from the manufacturer. Every dealership will be able to sell you Honda, Toyota, Chevy, Nissan extended service,
Hmm.
especially on your new car, but some of them might choose to do a different company. And I would never, ever, ever go with that other company because it's really easy to void any of those warranty coverages.
Yeah, I've heard some okay things about third party warranties. They may work for some people that are really cost constrained, and maybe you're buying a very mainstream car. I generally wouldn't do it, but I would actually go further than this, and I would say never buy that new car extended warranty from the dealer you are buying the car from, because
Mm,
they often will not give you as good of a deal as if you just walked out the door with that car and then did a little googly search and find one of these dealers around the US that sells extended warranties from the manufacturer. Pretty much every brand has a dealer out there that will do this, and they will give much better pricing because all they want to do is sell a ton of these warranties and only make 50 bucks or something like that on the back end. So they price them
yep.
super low. And that is something, for instance, that I know a lot of Volvo shoppers especially do, that
Mm,
I've met and talked with. There are some dealers out there that do the overseas delivery mill, the parts mill, the warranty mill, basically, where they're like, I don't care whether you bought the car from me or not. We're selling extended warranties. We're selling the parts super cheap.
mhm.
And if you're interested in the overseas delivery options from companies, these other car dealers out there will be able to handle the delivery of the vehicle to you, etc., through those programs, and you actually can end up saving some cash, which
This is
does
all best
bring.
done in advance so that
Yes.
you know what these
Yeah,
things
yeah.
are, and
Hmm.
if you have this, I'm making up a number, right? But let's just say they'll sell you the extended coverage for $1,500,
Hmm.
and the dealership you're at will sell it to you for $1,750, and you
Hmm.
say, I don't want to have to deal with somebody else. It's worth $250 extra dollars. Awesome. You at least have that information in
Yep.
advance.
Yep. And that brings us along to the next question, which is buying cars out of state. This is something
Mm,
that can get tricky, and I suspect actually maybe getting a bit trickier because we're seeing some car companies go back to the before times where we didn't have 50 state emissions vehicles. Do you remember those
mhm.
eras? Um,
A little before my
Ford
time, especially for buying cars.
Ford, for instance, has recently announced that there's basically going to be about a 30 state emission version of the Mustang in the EcoBoost
Mhm.
format. And then there's also going to be the 50 state compliant version. There's not going to be any cost difference, apparently. No cost difference, no performance difference. There's going to be an emissions difference, but not an efficiency difference. So, same fuel economy, same price, etc. But if you are in California or Oregon or Washington or Colorado or New York or a bunch of the other states that are in this
Which we
different
are.
emissions bucket, right?
Mhm.
And you decide, oh, there's a better deal on a car in Texas, then you need to know whether that vehicle is actually going to be able to be registered and emission certified in your home state. It's also tricky for people that may buy a brand new car and then immediately pick up and need to move because of a job or something like that in another state. This is that complication that we had in the 80s and 90s that is kind of a pain, but definitely seems to be coming back now.
Yeah.
Also, the registration, the taxes, the travel permits, that can get complicated as well.
Yeah, we had a call in from Jay, who is out in Tacoma, Washington, so not too far from myself. Thanks for calling in, Jay. And the issue here was he was really hunting, it seems like really hunting for the best deal on a new minivan. And I applaud people looking for a good deal, but I'll be honest, Jay, I think you probably went way farther than I would. And he ended up driving down to Oregon, which in that case is probably 2.5 hours away, something like that, to look at a very specific model. And shockingly enough, when he got there, the price that he had agreed upon or had been presented went up by $1,000. And here's the problem. You just spent 2.5 hours, so a minimum of 5 hours there and back of your time, and they
Mm-hmm.
know that, right? They
Mm-hmm.
know that you, a interested, committed buyer, have just spent time to come on down. I don't remember at this case if we were trading in a vehicle or not, but especially if you are trading in a vehicle, you need that vehicle there. So you've again committed more of your purchase to this day, and they go, "Oh, I'm sorry, the one you were looking at sold, but we have another one exactly the same, and it's $1,000." Or the person who gave you that price wasn't approved to give you that discount, but here's what we can do. And I think in Jay's
Mm-hmm.
case, they offered him $200 less than that increased price, which is still plus $800. And he ended up buying the car, but ran into a couple other issues. And a lot of that had to do with the paperwork of doing
Mm-hmm.
basically transaction across state. Oregon doesn't have sales tax, Washington does. And if you're at a spot that's near a border, in which case Jay was, they're probably pretty familiar with somebody coming across state lines looking for a specific model, or if it's so let's say it's a Genesis or Volvo, it's just a lower volume brand. They know people are going to the nearest one to them, and it's probably not in their state. But then he got a travel permit, so a temporary tag essentially.
So the reason, for people that don't know what we're talking about here, the reason you need the travel permit is because, say I was to buy a car in Texas
Mhm.
and I live in California. Well, you don't register it in Texas because that would be silly because you don't
Right.
live there. So what happens is the dealer will sell you the car. They won't charge you the sales tax theoretically in that state as long as it leaves the state within a certain period of time. And so they'll give you these temporary travel permits. States have different time limits and time frames on them and restrictions about what can and can't happen with a travel permit. You also have to check the state you're traveling to that you reside in for this detail. So for instance, if you get a 36-hour travel permit from Texas and you're buying an electric car, is that enough time for you to actually drive it home and charge it the whole way, right? Things to
Mhm.
keep in mind. Also, you need to make sure that you register it immediately when you get home because your home state may not have any leeway on this. For instance, I believe California, it's immediate. You may drive the car to your home and then to the DMV to complete this transaction, but like that's it. Don't stop,
Mhm.
don't pass go, don't collect $200. You can't do anything else with the thing until you do this. And as I recall, that is the situation in Washington as well.
Yeah, so that permit was set to go from Oregon to the DMV in your state. And that's not what he was told, and that's not what he understood.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of a sudden, technically, he's out of compliance. He's breaking the law. And so then there's the hustle and bustle. And then he found out what most people find out is that once you buy the car from the dealership, the service experience changes because, and this is the unfortunate part about the business, you're not making them any more money when you come back with a question or concern. They have already gotten your money. The salesperson does not get paid more to answer your questions. The
Mm-hmm.
finance people don't get paid more. You are now sort of a burden. And they don't tend to want to deal with you in a particular way. And there's no rush because they're done. Not that everyone's going to treat you like garbage, but just know they're not incentivized to serve you at this point. And so there was a lot of back and forth, a lot of stress. And this is where I would say, hey, buying out of a state wasn't worth it. I don't know how
Mm-hmm.
much money Jay ultimately saved. Let's say it was a couple $1,000s, and a couple $1,000s is a lot of money. But for me, if it comes down to, I don't know, $10 a month, and I didn't have to go through
Mm-hmm.
a headache, I might just pay my $10 a month for the next couple years.
Yeah. Also, beware that in higher sales tax states where you're paying sales tax on the vehicle, you're not going to be able to roll that into financing if you do it this way because that
Right.
transaction's already done. So you have to pay cash to the DMV for, or sales tax for that particular purchase, in addition to the registration and all that, which you can calculate online yourself, but it is a consideration to keep in mind.
So,
It,
Alex, in what case would you buy a car out of state? Because I know mine is really limited. For me, it's not going to be a new car unless
Mhm.
there was some ungodly deal that
I
applied
was
to me.
I
You
was
know,
hunting for a Blazer EV in the before times. We were hunting for one out of state. We were looking for one in Texas because Texas had this glut of Blazer EVs with fantastic deals on them. And it was actually the dealer that was like, we looked into the process of getting the travel permit and we're just not interested. Sorry, we won't sell it to anybody that's not in Texas. So
okay,
those sorts of things happen. But
yep,
Texas and California, I think, are somewhat different cases because the states are physically so large and it takes so much time to get out of the joint
hmm
that it's less likely that people are going to be crossing state boundaries for the purchase unless you're in El Paso and someone in New Mexico is coming in, right? Or you're in Palm Springs and maybe you're willing to truck all the way to Vegas or something to buy a car. Limited
Yeah.
situations,
You can
Tahoe
always
and
ship a
Reno.
car, but
You
there's always
can.
costs and concerns that come along with that.
Yeah, the shipping of the car is tricky because then you're adding cost on top of that, and that can negate some of the savings, et cetera. So that's kind
But
of a tricky thing
so
there.
too is an airplane ticket and hotels, depending on how
Exactly.
far you're going for your car.
And we bought the Blazer EV in Los Angeles, so we effectively did actually way more than what this gentleman did with his
Hmm.
Kia, because we flew all the way to Los Angeles, and then drove 330 miles back with the car,
Yeah.
because that was the screaming deal at the time, and we thought it would make a good video, and I had some miles to burn anyway. So it all kind of gelled together there. The Grenadier
Yeah.
also was purchased in Pasadena, so 340 miles away, something like that.
Hmm.
So there are times where maybe it makes sense for specific reasons, but no, go into it clear-headed, know how it's going to go in advance there.
For
And the
me, I would
last.
only I would only ever actually look out of state for a used vehicle that was really rare or unique, not one that I could
Mhm,
find in my home state. A couple months ago, I did fly down to Arizona to go look at a car,
mhm,
and
mhm.
glad I looked at it in person. If you can look at a car in person, always do it. And if you're shopping out of state, you can afford the plane ticket, you can afford the weekend. I mean, that's normally how that works. But like you, I had some miles to burn, so
Yep.
that made it a quick and easy trip. But beyond that, I just can't imagine there being a deal that's so worth it. The only one that I also considered was I heard that in Denver there was a lot of great deals on some Fiats, but the problem is you have to be a resident of Colorado.
Mhm.
So even though that Denver says you can save this much money, just know that only works if you actually lived there. So flying there doesn't do you any good.
Yeah, state discounts there. But you know what also would have saved you some cash is if you just listened to me in the first place.
I know. I know.
Anyway, we had a lot of questions around the car interest deduction. This is part of the recent legislation that was passed by Congress this year, and it's a weird thing because I don't know why we're giving deductions for new car interest, but whatever.
Hmm.
That's as it is. The benefit actually is quite small though, and this is the key thing. So we need to unpack this a little bit and describe what's going on. So purchases from 2025 through 2028 will get a interest deduction. And the nice touch here is that this applies to itemized or standard deduction tax filers. So you don't need to itemize to get this deduction, which is handy. But the actual benefit is quite small, and the beneficiary window is somewhat small as well. So there's a maximum annual deduction of $10,000, but you'd be hard pressed to get there because somehow you have to be a person whose AGI is under $100,000, adjusted gross income, under $100,000 or $200,000 joint, and you are buying a fantastically expensive vehicle somehow on that salary.
Hmm.
Above $100,000, it starts to phase out. The deduction actually has a sliding scale, and it's completely gone if you make over $150,000 or $250,000 jointly. It's
Hmm.
open to cars assembled in the United States only, under 14,000 pounds GVWR, for personal use only as well. The reality is, if you're paying about $1,200 a year in interest and you're in the 12% tax bracket, your savings is only like $144 a year. Most folks with W-2 earnings in this window, the benefit is going to be under $500 a year, generally speaking. So you're going to be well below that $10,000 limit. Even if we're talking about some of these higher interest rates, the benefit is actually quite small, and it's not going to make a big deal on the affordability of the vehicle. But for some folks out there that are really looking to save every penny and they do want a new car, they should definitely look into it. Just know that it's not going to be the difference between affording a Nissan Versa and affording a Crown Signia. It's not going to bridge the gap even between Versa and Maxima.
Yeah. This is a if you're buying a car in 2025, good to know, not a
Mhm.
reason to go buy a car in
Right.
2025.
And of course, it wouldn't help on the Versa or the Maxima purchase because it'd have to be built in the United States anyway. So, you
Right.
know, affordability difference between F-150 and, I don't know, other F-150.
Right.
Maybe you could
Yeah.
add the heated seats.
Right. You can go from XL to XLT.
Yeah. Well, maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. But coupled along with this one, we had another question here from a viewer. Do electric cars have any future and resale in North America? Doesn't want to buy a used $30,000
Uh,
car, not be able to sell it after 5 years with good value. This is an interesting crystal ball type question. On
yeah.
on the face, I think it's an easy one to say. Electric cars obviously have a future in the U.S. because even without the tax credits, sales are still good, and
Mm.
everybody is expecting more electric cars to be sold in 2025 than 2024 and in 2026 than in 2025. The question has been, how rapidly are these sales going to increase? I know I argued, I got to throw Roman under the bus. My good friend Roman Micah at TFL Car, and I'm not kidding there. We are very good friends.
TFL
Went to
car,
his,
TFL truck,
right, all
TFL
the
EV. Yeah.
TFLs. I
Yeah.
keep telling him he needs TFL floats for TFL boats.
That's,
All things on the water. TFL
oh my
floats.
goodness.
Could be
Yeah.
epic.
Yeah.
He thinks I'm crazy.
Our marketing genius knows no bounds, but continue.
So but Roman was big on this. Oh, the pendulum is going to swing. This was his favorite phrase. I'm like, I think that we're going to see a cooling off on this trend line of EV acceptance. I think we're going to hit not a wall, but we're going to hit a point where progress is going to be gradual. It's, oh, the pendulum's going to swing, the pendulum's going to swing, and we're going to see this ever accelerating curve, and everything is going to be electric. And that is not what we see. We see a
No.
we see increasing sales year on year, but we don't see that pace of adoption rapidly rising. So we're
Yeah.
not seeing 200%, 300%, 400% increases in EV sales as we had before. We're seeing modest increases, maybe 5, 10% more EVs sold this year than last year, what we're
Mhm.
probably going to see going forward. So definitely a future. We see more models coming. I would not be concerned about that at all. On the resale value front, the lack of the tax credit actually may have a positive impact on the quote unquote resale value of electric
Mhm.
vehicles. But this is something that we've talked about here before. If you are looking at this in the traditional resale value way, which is what's often applied to electric vehicles, it's a red herring because people misunderstand how resale value works. If you're buying a car for $37,500 and it has a $7,500 tax credit on it, you did not pay $37,500 for that car. You paid $30,000 for that car. The resale value calculations that you'll see bandied around are based off the $37,550, not the actual price you paid for the car. So come 3 or 5 years later and you're looking to sell the car, keep in mind what you paid for it. Yes, resale value has been soft on electric vehicles still, even accounting
Mhm.
for this versus some other non-electric vehicles, but the difference is not as big on many of those trims. And, you have to decide what you want to do. So I would not be overly concerned. We'll see what the impact of the loss of tax credits and incentive structures, et cetera, does for resale value longer term in the US, but I would not be concerned.
And honestly, long term, I'm generally not concerned either. I'll share a little story where I told a friend years ago, hey, that used BMW i3 is way less expensive than it used to be, right? It was less than 50% of its original MSRP 3 or 4 years later, something like that. I said, but it can't drop that much further. I mean, this is still a good usable car.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was a little bit wrong on that one. It did not just tank and it's not worth anything, but it didn't hold the value that I thought it might, and he'll hold that against me forever, and that's okay. He enjoyed it, so it was all worth it. But also, we saw a huge change in technology in electric vehicles, where his
Mm-hmm.
i3 couldn't go more than about 80 miles on a charge. Now we had Tesla Model 3s that could go 250 miles. In that time period, we saw a huge leap in technology. We are not seeing that huge leap at the moment. There have been continued steady increases. There is the everlasting question of when's the solid state battery going to come
Mm-hmm.
out? When am I going to be able to charge it in 5 and 10 minutes? And all these other cars are going to be obsolete. But I'll tell you what, I think every teenager should be driving an old Nissan Leaf. I think those
Yep.
are still a very valuable vehicle. It just gets more niche in who can buy it and use it. And that's the problem with EVs right now,
Mm-hmm.
is not the technology, it's not
Right.
the charging, it's not are they worth anything, it's the niche aspect. If you're
Mm-hmm.
worried about it, lease your car.
Yep.
You would be doing yourself a disservice by ignoring an EV
Mm-hmm.
because you were worried about resale value. Lease the car. And
Yep.
if at the end of your lease you want to buy it and you think it's worth the value, great, buy it out or just drop it off. Or maybe it is worth more than they thought it would be, and that's why you got such a good lease deal or whatever. You have options. or buy that used one. And if you're worried
Hmm.
about what happens to an EV after 3 years, buy a certified pre-owned. I think right now, and I'll, hand over heart, whatever it is, I think EVs are the best used car value right now, just about bar none, because they have unfortunately slipped below where they really ought to, because there's an adoption question, there's concerns about charging, it's a new technology, who can use it? If
Hmm.
you can buy a used EV, my goodness, you are knocking it out of the park. But I wouldn't say
Hmm.
don't buy a new EV. I went and bought a new EV a couple years ago, and I'm satisfied with it. And mine got way less expensive after I bought it. So
Hmm.
even with a hit in resale value, I still really like my car. So
And that's probably the biggest hit on resale value for things like the Tesla lineup has been Tesla's rapidly fluctuating prices.
mhm,
So if Tesla drops the price by $10,000 on a new vehicle, which is considered good for the industry, right? Then that is
mhm,
bad for resale value for everybody that already owned one because their cars now have taken a huge hit in resale value.
mhm.
But I would not be worried about the increase in technology. I know a lot of people have said, "Oh, I wouldn't buy one now because solid state batteries are coming around the door." Well, solid state batteries in mainstream EVs are going to take a real long time. Don't
And they're going
let
to be real
anybody
expensive.
don't let
Yeah.
anybody fool you on that one. We know this because we have seen the way that technology has been rolled out in EVs up to this point. And we also see the rise of the LFP batteries. These did not happen overnight. We did not just go
Mhm,
from a high volume car like Model 3 using all LFP batteries overnight. They had certain models with LFP batteries here and there. We see some manufacturers embracing LFP, some manufacturers not, some embracing NCM batteries, different chemistries. Remember that just because it's an NCM battery doesn't mean the chemistry is identical. There's lots of different battery chemistries going on, and these get rolled out slowly over time. So solid state batteries are likely to come. We're likely to see faster charging at some point, but
mhm.
will the stations be able to support this? Maybe, maybe not. It's a lot of unknowns
How
there.
often will you use it is the
Right.
one that I know I keep
Hmm.
banging my head on the wall, but like,
Yep.
trust me, having been an EV driver for
Hmm.
years who drives more miles than most of you, especially in single trips, gosh, you just do not stop and charge very often at all.
Yep. And then there's the reality that not all EVs have seen this big drop in depreciation. If we take a look at more stably priced EVs, for instance, like the very popular Chevy Blazer EV, for instance, GM's been actually selling quite a number of Blazers. A 2024 here, for instance, we've got a bunch of listings here with around 30 something thousand miles. So basically a little over a year old, probably 30,000 miles ish or so. They're all going for right around $30,000. That is not actually a bad MSRP drop because remember that nobody was paying full on price for a Blazer.
Mhm.
In fact, if we look at the Blazer EV right now for a 2025, for instance, and we pull up the build and buy on the GM website, right now we're looking at an MSRP of $45,000. But when you actually go out and shop for them and look for those matches nearby, you'll notice that many places out there are putting about $15,000 of cash on the hood. So that $7,500 tax credit plus cash on the hood leads you actually to a very similar MSRP for that used model. And at that point, you might as well buy the brand new one.
Plus, right now, 0% interest for 60 months on Blazer EV. So that's savings to boot on top of that.
So, not all EVs are seeing these huge depreciation slides. It really just depends on what EV we're talking about, how desirable it is on the used market, and of course, the entire package deal for the pricing around that one, as well as newer versions of that one.
So at the end of it, car buying, it is a process. It is wearing, it is jarring. But the best thing you can do, besides listen to this podcast and ask us questions at hey@autobuyersguide.com or leave comments down in this comment section for YouTube watchers, have the information available in advance. You know where to
Hmm.
find it now. You can find it on the dealership websites. You can find things like that invoice pricing at, like I said, Edmunds, and I think you had a significant list there. The information is there. You got to know where to look for it. You got to be willing to do
Hmm.
the research in advance. And the best, I guess, the most dangerous buyer to a dealership is an informed buyer. And especially anyone listening to this, be the informed buyer. You have all the
Hmm.
tools available to you. Decide on the car you want. Set a budget for yourself. Don't start playing the Foursquare game. If they start pulling out a paper and start writing
Hmm.
down a bunch of numbers, remember the numbers that you had in your head. this car has an MSRP of this. You are already approved for this
Hmm.
interest rate. You know that this is how much money you want to spend per month. And obviously, if you're looking for a used car value, you can always try and sell it on a Carvana or one of these other
Hmm.
sites that gets you a number. Then you can go to Kelly Blue Book and you can get a separate number there, and then just use those as your benchmarks.
Yep.
And with all those tools, you should be one of the folks who doesn't end up with a horror story from a dealership. And I would love to see less horror stories from dealerships because when I worked there, I tried to make sure no one left with a horror story, but it's not always that easy.
Yep. And remember, you can do more and more of this in advance, up to and including signing contracts from home. Many dealerships will let you do that now. So always explore those options. And at that point, you can pretty much bet that you know what the pricing is going to be. You can be as informed as possible, and you can make that pickup process easier. So this works on leases, it works on purchases. Ask your dealer if it's an option. You can shop around, call around yourself, of course, from dealer to dealer, looking for pricing on specific things. Email is a good friend there. And then you could try and complete those contracts online. Ask those dealers if that is something that can be done. Many of them now will let you do that.
And this is the second biggest purchase of your life. That's what everyone says. Most people don't, unless you're real big into watches or off-road toys or boats, etc. This is most people's second biggest purchase. Don't go to the nearest dealer and just get everything done. Be willing to go drive. If you look
Mm-hmm.
at again, we said F-150 XLT. Say, oh, but I really like this color, and they go, we don't have any. Ask them if they can get one. If they say no, then go online, look up the next 5 closest dealers, find the one that has the color you want, and please go look at that color. And if you say it's not
Mm-hmm.
worth it because it's $500 more, then move along. But give yourself a chance to get the thing you want, so that again, when we read our comments on certain cars we post and they go, oh, I absolutely love my blank, those are my favorite comments to read, and I want a
Mm-hmm.
lot more of that from car buyers, especially those listening to our stuff.
Yep. All right, everybody. Be sure and sound off in that comment section. Subscribe to us if you haven't already done so. You can also send emails to hey@autobuyersguide.com, voice feedback, call us at 669-842-1947, and we'll see all of you
Mhm.
next week.